There are federal.
Greet everyone.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Glad you could be here. It's a little bit early in the morning, but I wanted to talk about.
Give people a chance to arrive.
I'll wait a minute until everyone gets here or more people get here. But it's it's a nice day here in northern Ontario. We've had a lot of rain this year, but it's not smoking hot anyway, so that's always all right with me. But it's been weighing on my mind about all the problems we have in transportation and how to solve them. I think about that constantly. And I've come to the conclusion that one of the biggest problems we have is the state of California. Now, there are federal laws regulating that one cannot interfere with what they call interstate commerce. And that's self explanatory. Yet California does this every day and does it all the time. And specifically, the best example these days are the emissions regulations. So, California has its own emissions board called CARB. They're not, they don't seem to be governed by the EPA, which has national coverage. But California Air Resources Board controls everything that goes on in California. But that affects the trucks built right across the nations. So, and that interferes with interstate commerce because California CARB dictates the emission standards for federally controlled trucks. So, what that means is a truck from Virginia, for instance, can't enter California unless it complies with California emissions regulations. And that interferes with interstate commerce. What happens is California decides, well, we're going to restrict the emissions to this much this year, and they have a mandate. So truck manufacturers look at this mandate and realize that they can't build one set of trucks for California and a whole nother set of trucks for every other state in the union. So they end up building trucks that are California specific and selling them across the country. So what that means is a guy in Michigan or a guy in Ohio has to buy a truck that's regulated for California emission standards. And that's not right. I understand that California has problems with pollution and emissions, and everyone's concerned about that. But when California and CARB set an emissions standards date, that affects transportation, trucking transportation across the country. And it's come to be seen as impractical in a lot of cases because truck drivers are giving up their older equipment that works just fine because they need to be able to get into California. And California is a huge business hub. There's a lot of produce out of there. There are the seaports like Oakland and LA and Long Beach. There is a lot of freight that moves in and out of California and hauled by out-of-state trucks. But now all those out-of-state trucks are held to California's standards. And that affects everybody. It affects the cost of the truck. It affects all sorts of things.
Costs.
Pardon me? The way the truck operates. We know now from recent history that these new emission trucks don't operate particularly well. They're not efficient. They burn more fuel than the old trucks, and they have all these problems. But now all of a sudden, everybody in the trucking industry has to share these problems. Problems developed by California because they didn't properly research what was possible and what wasn't. They just set a mandate. It's politicians setting the mandate, and they just throw it out there and say to the technology guys and the engineers, well, here's your new line. Meet it or else. And it's not a practical line. So I'm all for cleaner air and cleaner water, all that stuff. But it's been rushed by CARB, and this cost us hugely. It's costly to our wallets when buying equipment and the operating costs. Everything's out of whack now because we're trying to make California happy. So California has effectively interfered with interstate commerce because every state, every truck driver, and every state in the union now can only buy a truck that can run legally in California. And there are all sorts of states that don't have emissions problems and issues, yet they've got to buy a California compliant truck, and they're nothing but problems because they don't work particularly well. Look at the other things that California has dictated that has hurt us. The content, the makeup of diesel fuel, that low sulfur diesel fuel, in an attempt to lower the emissions, has turned out to be crap. While it works well in California, the stuff gels when you get into the colder climates. And everyone else has to deal with that. Everybody in Minnesota and North Dakota end up swapping out their fuel filters 2 or 3 times a month because the fuel gel is in there. It's affecting interstate commerce adversely. And I don't think this should be allowed. The government, the federal government, should be stepping in and saying, this has got to work for everyone, and it's not. It's hurt truck manufacturers because all of a sudden they've changed all their production to try to meet the emission standards. Now they're changing all their production again to try to make electric trucks, and they'll work someday and they'll work fine for short haul. But we are a nation of long haul needs as well. And California now is trying to make them produce completely all electric trains as well. That's being mandated in California. So suddenly the trains from across North America won't be legal in California. So all the huge rail lines are looking to change hundreds of millions of dollars worth of train engines to be compliant in California. And it's, at the end of the day, it's the taxpayer that pays the brunt of this cost, because governments don't have money. They just pass everything on to the taxpayers. So it just hurts the national economy, and it's California doing the worst of it to most of the states and most of the population. And I can't understand why the federal government hasn't picked its head up, looked around and go, wait a minute, this isn't working out for everybody. It's costing us a fortune, and it's not helping us at all. The pollution rate is not going down, but everyone's paying into this technology that doesn't work. There are 27 different states now that are suing California over their emissions regulations. And the EPA has just kind of looked at what CARB's doing and gone, oh, yeah, that'd be easy. Okay, let's follow CARB's example. So the EPA is just worthless because they're just being dictated to by CARB. So 27 states now have decided to sue the state of California over these emission standards. One state, Virginia, has basically just said, we don't care what you do. We're not doing that here in West Virginia or Virginia. We need our trucks to run properly. We don't care about the age. We don't care about the emissions. They need to work properly. And Virginia's just rejected CARB and the EPA altogether. And they've done that not to be nasty about emissions or not to be nasty politically. It's hurting their state economy. And they have figured that out, and they have figured out that if they want to survive financially, they have got to go back to a system that works. Green ideology is great, but if it doesn't work, if it hurts the economy, it is not the right way to go. I think, yeah.
Just have a quick comment from Daniel Webb. I have a Peterbilt 567 and I can't stand the emissions on my truck, and I live in Texas and I have problems with my truck now and I want to buy an old school truck.
That's right. All sorts of guys now are rebuilding their trucks and staying in their home states rather than have to buy a new truck and put up with California emissions equipment that gives them trouble and gives them grief. Over 80% of truck malfunctions these days are with the emissions equipment. And it adds another $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 now to the price of a truck. And it's going to get worse in 2027. And like small truck operators, owner operators, they cannot afford that. They cannot afford another $40,000 or $60,000 to put into a truck. They need that money to feed their families and keep operating. Look at these guys that run the ports in California. Most of those truckers, those independent guys that run the ports in California, run older equipment because that's all they can afford, and that's frankly all they need. They only operate within, a 50, 100-mile radius. They don't need a $400,000 electric truck. They're not going to be able to afford a $400,000 electric truck. And here's California that's dictating everything go electric. And yet these are the guys that can't plug their cars in and run their air conditioning at the same time. There is no decent electric power grid in California to support this ideology. But nobody seems to care or nobody seems to notice, and all of that just runs downhill, and truckers are bearing the brunt of that cost. And it's stupid. And I can't understand why government hasn't looked at the financial numbers of each state going downwards, down the spiral, as they try to figure out this green technology. And California is leading the way. Here we've got a state that's going broke, and yet they're allowed to dictate financial policy to the rest of the nation? That's crazy, but that's what's happening right now.
Another comment from Chris James. I use a diesel pickup and 99% of my issues are the emissions.
Yes, and everyone is finding that. It's the emissions equipment that don't work well. And I talked to a CAT engineer years ago about this, and he said, an engine is like a person. It needs to be able to inhale air and exhale. It needs to breathe. And these emissions systems restrict the exhaling of these engines. They can't get the exhaust out properly. It backs up and plugs up the system, and it's just a nightmare, and it's a waste of time, and it's an unnecessary expense. And as I say, it'll take, years and years from now, as engineers work on it, we'll be able to develop the technology to produce trucks that work and yet still run properly and efficiently, and they're reliable. But California is rushing everything, and I don't know why they like to do this, but they're rushing everything. Give science a chance to keep up with the technology that we're after, rather than mandating a 2027 date and saying, well, everyone's got to do this or they can't get into California. And I know a lot of owner-operators that have just said, and myself included, have just said, you know what? I don't need to go to California anymore. If California's going to be like that, there's still lots of life left in my truck. I don't feel like trading it in for a truck that doesn't work properly. I'm just going to keep my truck and run closer to home and let all the big mega carriers take care of California if they can. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Mega carriers aren't particularly good with hauling produce, for instance. So, because they've got restrictions on them and they can't meet the time schedules. So, California's CARB regulations have basically disrupted trucking across the country. And all sorts of small California trucking companies have just gone out of business or moved to another state because the stupidity is just too much to deal with, and it affects their bottom line too drastically. They're in the business to make money, not try to satisfy some new California mandate that may or may not even actually work. The numbers, the air quality numbers for California are not going down. They're going up. But part of the reason is the population, I'm sure, and part of the reason is all the cars. They've got millions and millions, something like 40 million citizens in California. Each and every one of them drives a car because California has no viable transit system. They've got 100 feet of train rail, monorail sitting out in the desert somewhere that they weren't able to complete. They tried to copy the Japanese model of these super fast trains, and the government poured millions into that and quit after about a quarter mile of track or a half mile of track or something like that. It's just, they're blowing money out the wazoo, and it's the taxpayers' money that they're blowing out the wazoo. But it's hurting trade across the country, and that is the biggest thing. You don't see CARB-like officers sitting in the ports of New Jersey and New York looking for trucks that don't meet the emission standards and shutting them down and kicking them out, because New Jersey knows that stuff has got to move. That freight's got to move. I don't know why California is allowed to interfere with that type of commerce.
Dancy Dance, thank you so much for the donation. Greetings, first time catching live. Do you have any advice for someone looking to become a trucker right now? I work nights and AM used to being alone.
Well, these days, with all the stupidity going on in trucking and the fact that the freight volume is really low, I would get a job as a company driver and let them take all the expense and all the responsibility. There's not enough freight to support an owner-operator position these days. The fuel is a stupid price. I looked this morning and fuel is $3.50 in Oklahoma, and that's the cheapest state. California is still over $5 a gallon for fuel. Fuel is the biggest cost to an owner-operator apart from purchasing the truck. And it's just unsustainable in 99% of the cases, unless you're a private industry that has their own trucks or something like that. It's just not sustainable. The freight rate is in the toilet, and that affects owner operators as well. Look at Prime. Even Prime is struggling because they've got too many trucks and too little cheap freight. Everyone's struggling right now. And they say that part of the problem with the freight is overcapacity. Too many trucks. So you don't want to be the guy that's going out and investing a fortune in a new truck and the expenses that go along with it, like plates and insurance, then to just find out that you can't even get freight because you're a new guy and the insurance companies and the brokers don't trust you, or there's just so little freight that the big carriers are snapping it all up and there's nothing left for the little guy. And already that's happening in the industry. And if overcapacity is the problem, and that is part of the problem, I believe that these carriers with 10,000 trucks should cut back on the number of trucks that they run just to allow the little guys more of a chance. And of course, they're not going to do that voluntarily, but I think the government should mandate that as well. If there truly is an overcapacity, restrict these carriers like Swift with 22,000 trucks so the rest of us get a little more freight, get a fair crack at the freight. That's my answer to that anyway. But I don't understand how a state with such poor economic policy is allowed to dictate to the rest of the country. And I understand the goal. I just think the way they're going about it is all wrong, and it's hurting truck drivers in every state in the union because they can't buy the trucks that they want. They're forced to buy the emissions trucks that cost them more money and give them more trouble. And I think California needs to be dealt with. I don't know if you'd ever get enough truck drivers together to say, we're just not going to California anymore. The rules are too tight. We're just not going. There's no money to be made there. That's what most of the independents like myself have done. But owner-operators work for carriers that send them there, so they've got to buy new trucks so the carrier will work them. But I think one of the best things to do would be just quit going to California. And certainly the produce industry would notice that. And that is the biggest industry in California, is the produce industry. And I can't understand, how they're managing these days. I know they're putting a whole lot more of the produce on rail, but the freight gets there more slowly, the produce ages more, and the profits are lower because of that.
Just a comment from Buddy Lee, they will just import drivers from Mexico and Canada.
Well, they can import all the cheap labor that they want, and that's fine. But then the carriers need to buy all this crap equipment, the emissions equipment. So yeah, that's probably what they're up to. So let them keep all the brand new drivers and all the crap emissions equipment in California, because they're no good for running cross country anyway. So maybe that's the solution. Just let California be in its own little world and everyone else quit worrying about going there.
Ryan M., the DEF on these trucks do not do what they want it to do as far as saving the environment. When you consider the transportation of it all, the plastic jugs laying everywhere, it's just a bunch of garbage.
That's true. And they're trying to get rid of plastic, but they mandate these DEF jugs, and they're all plastic. I've come to see that in California, a lot of the owner-operators that have newer trucks that are supposed to be using DEF are just filling up their DEF tanks with water from the garden hose, and they seem to be working just fine. Now, if CARB catches them, I'm sure there'll be an issue. But, is the point to meet the emission standards, or is the point to survive financially and be able to feed your family? I know which one I'd choose. So, and I think California is working against that. as I say, I understand the need for clean air, and California does have an issue that way. But a lot of that is self-created within California. So control your own citizenry if you want as to what they drive, because that's you're allowed to do that legally. But don't interfere with interstate commerce. Don't interfere with the trucks and the trains, and even the rail lines now are saying we're not going to be able to do that. Be realistic about this. But California doesn't care about realistic. California cares about being the greenest state in the country. And they're going broke doing it.
Edward Davis made a comment, once they leave our ports, they switch to unrefined diesel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And having to put up with this nonsense just to get in and out of California is time consuming, it's costly, and it's stupid. So there's a solution maybe. If California wants to mandate electric cars for all of their citizens, I guess they can go ahead and do it. But quit interfering with the rest of us. Quit interfering with the truck manufacturers that want to make trucks that work. Quit interfering with the truck drivers that want reliable equipment and don't want to go to California. Quit interfering with the interstate commerce of the nation and let us get back to work and let us start making money again. Because California is holding our feet to the fire and it's hurting everybody.
Just a shout out to Poet. Thanks so much, Poet, for the support. Thanks so much.
Hey, Poet, glad you're with us today. So that's basically my rant on California, and I think it's the responsibility of the federal government to do something about this. It is not a practical solution to what we need to do. Our economy has been suffering since the pandemic. We need to get back up and running again, and running at 110%. And the low freight and the emissions problems are creating a huge blockade towards that end. I can hear a train coming in the background, but perhaps a change in the presidency in November will facilitate an improvement on that situation. Because if anything, Trump is a practical thinker and he understands business, whereas Gavin Newsom and Biden, I don't think they understand or care about business at all. But and look at the mandates for the fuel production that they've put in place now. It's just it's ridiculous not to produce diesel nationally, yet import it from overseas and pay more for it. Like, what is that solving? That's crazy.
You're going to have a bit of competition with the train.
Yeah, the train's coming, so I gotta let it go by here, I think.
I'll try to read a few comments. Ryan, I've got a 95 Kenworth that is a piece of crap, but I'm fixing to dump a lot of money in it and then sell my 2016 truck. I still think it makes better financial sense.
I'd agree with you. And there's thousands of guys doing exactly that. All those guys in Pennsylvania, they figured all that out. They're putting in rebuild engines. They're not running with this new emission stuff. And truck drivers want to be able to work on this stuff when they get home, not sit in line at a Freightliner dealership waiting for a turn to fix a system that shouldn't exist in the first place, and waiting weeks in some cases, and then paying thousands to have this stuff repaired or replaced. That's just
hundreds of dollars per hour.
Yeah, at labor rates of over $100 an hour. That's just money out the window, when you could have a simple engine, work on it yourself, and go back to work later that day or something like that. Or have all sorts of the old guys used to have like a backup engine that they would rebuild up over time as they were trucking, and then when the one they had in the truck wore out, they just swap motors, take them a day, keep on going again. And it was a far better system than sending them all to the dealership. And the dealerships are dealing with their own problems because they can't find licensed mechanics, because nobody knows how to work on these new engines. You got to be a computer tech. So what they have is one licensed mechanic, one tech, and he goes around and supervises trainees, guys that don't have their ticket yet for mechanical work. So you've got a shop full of trainees working on equipment that they don't understand, and you're paying $140, $150 an hour for this kind of service.
Someone has commented, no one talks about the mental stress that emissions put on you. It's always on your mind.
Boy, that is
Huh,
that
good,
is a really good point.
good point.
The mental stress, and one of the worst stresses that a truck driver has is to break down, because you don't know what's going to come. A huge bill, lost time, a claim on the freight. The old engines were reliable, and I've always said that reliability is key. And there's huge stress with these new trucks, guys worrying about whether they're going to get home or not. And it's not even just the owner operators.
Or just make their delivery on
Or
time.
make their delivery on time. And it's not just owner operators. Company drivers can have plans for the weekend or something like that, and the damn thing breaks down. It's a emissions problem, and they can't get home. And the company goes, well, you'll just have to wait with the truck because you'll be waiting for free, and that's the best solution. So,
Poet has a good point. Mechanics are not longer mechanics, they are techs, which equals parts changers.
yeah, that's Poet's right. And they even call them techs in some of the shops now. And they don't really analyze a problem. They don't understand what's caused the problem. They don't care to understand it. They'll just swap out the part, not fix the problem. It'll cost you money and the problem's still not solved, but it's enough to get you out of the shop, get you down the road 500 miles before it breaks down again and plugs up or whatever it does. It's a stupid system. But that's right. And you're paying for this lack of expertise, and you're suffering downtime huge. I don't know why they can't get back to a practical world where everything works the way it should, and you can get a million miles out of a motor the way you used to be able to. So it's hurting the economy, it's hurting truck drivers, it's hurting families, it's hurting everybody, and no one's benefiting. The emissions numbers for the air quality numbers have not gone down, and they're not going to go down because China is building 2 coal plants every day, and all that stuff just drifts over here anyways.
Trucks, Trains, and Tractors commented, who died made California our boss? Who said we've got to listen to them? The reason I said this is because all I ever hear is that they rule and govern.
Yeah, California. Who made California boss? Well, the government, federal government, has allowed them to be boss, and that's where they've gone wrong. And you know what? Farming equipment now also needs to have all this emissions equipment on it. And I watched a video on the new John Deere combines, and those things are hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're not reliable anymore. These brand new combines are not reliable anymore. And they've got to wait for a tech from John Deere to come out to get the thing up and running. Meanwhile, their crops are spoiling in the field. Does that sound productive to you? Of course it isn't. The farmers are fuming, so they don't know what to do either. But it's a ridiculous situation, and all for a fallacy that they're never really going to solve. They can improve it, but they'll never solve the problem because other countries are not following suit. So if you want clean air in the United States and Canada, let's take our time and go about it methodically, rather than restricting all our equipment that we need to make money to make the country run properly.
No Toes commented, 1 million mile trucks though would hurt BlackRock's bottom line.
He's got a good point. He's got a good point, and that makes you think that perhaps the deck is so stacked against us that this is a battle that we'll never really win, because he's right. It's not about how well we as small-time businessmen survive. It's about more and more purchasing of more and more trucks, which boosts more and more stock for the shareholders, and that's truly what it's all about, I suppose, is making investors more money, guys like BlackRock and Vanguard. And that's it's a sad statement, but he's right. He's absolutely right. It's not about you and me anymore. And there's something else that the government has done and gotten wrong. And they've worried about all these big corporations because that's where they get political donations, and they haven't cared about the men and women driving the trucks or the tractors in the fields, And the whole thing is kind of working against us slowly. And I don't know where it's going to end. My guess is in the future, it'll end with the entire collapse of our economy because there's no one able to do the real work that needs to be done. So that's a sad statement, but it may come to that.
A comment from Jack Thomas. These truck dealerships will hold your truck for days for just one simple issue. You have to be an engineer to diagnose any problem with these emissions problems.
Yes, yes, and there's no need for that. It's not practical, and all sorts of guys were pulling the emissions equipment off their trucks, their newer trucks, to make them run properly. And the moment they took off the emissions equipment, they were running properly. Government made that illegal. All sorts of guys were buying glider kits.
Just hang tight. I'm going to move a little bit here. There. They can't hear you very well.
All sorts of guys were buying glider kits and putting good working motors in them. And the government made that illegal. So, like, how do they want us to survive? Because it's just not working out. So I guess the best way to change everything that's going on is to get a different party in running the government next time around. Because this party has done nothing but hurt our economy and hurt our workers. And as a worker, that affects me and my family and all of you out there as well that are watching. So perhaps that's the best start to what we can do to go ahead and start fixing these issues that shouldn't even exist in the first place. It's nice to have ideology out there, but when the ideology is truly a fallacy, when you look at it, when you look at the hard facts, it's time to get rid of that ideology and move on. And this green ideology is not working right now. So we've got to move on. We've got to do something else so our trucks work properly and they're reliable. Bring back the glider kits, kick out carb, and bring back the older engines that work properly. Lower the price of diesel fuel. Make it real diesel fuel again so it doesn't gel up in the winter. Get rid of the DEF fluid. Get rid of this regeneration system that hurts the engines. Get rid of all of that. Let's go back to the basics. What we know worked. And it's only a crazy society that takes something that works so well and then monkeys with it. And that's exactly what's happened here. We've got a couple of ideologues that have come in and said, oh, we've got to change all of this. Al Gore, we've got to change all of this. The whales are dying. Bullshit. All it did was make him a multi-millionaire doing speeches around the world. And part of the world has bought into this ideology and it's destroying the economy. And it's not just happening over here in North America. It's happening over in Europe too. And they're starting to figure out that they've got issues. Germany has gone back to coal-fired plants because that's the only thing that keeps them warm in the winter. They've realized that solar technology is not going to cut it in a country with snow. And Russia hasn't even entertained anything stupid like that. They know they've got a cold climate. They know they've got to make their trucks run and heat their homes. They haven't done any of that. So, who's smarter, Putin or Biden? It makes Biden look pretty foolish.
Ryan Harris comments, I'm getting a delete kit. Are the kits any good?
The kits are good. The trucks work well after the delete kit, but be careful not to get caught because the government has made those illegal now. So
huge fines.
Yeah, they're huge fines. But you know what? It's between feeding your family or obeying the emissions regulations. So which are you going to choose? If you're just running locally, running short stuff in a state like North Dakota where you probably never get checked, I would do it in a heartbeat because I'm all for surviving first and worrying about the consequences later. And what judge, when you end up going to court with the EPA, what judge is going to say, well, you don't have the right to feed your family? It's ridiculous. We shouldn't be in this position. We elect politicians to keep us out of situations like that, not put us into situations like this. So the whole thing is just a backwards mess. But we need to stand up as truck drivers and go, you know what? Enough of this. Whatever it takes, we're going to survive. And if California has to cart their produce out in wheelbarrows, let them do that. But we need to survive, and the economy needs to survive. I'll be interested to see what the rails do, because the rails don't like to be dictated to, and they got tons and tons of money. And right now they're fighting CARB about these electric diesel trucks or engines, the electric trains. They're fighting it tooth and nail, saying can't be done, not possible.
Somebody said a comment, death is more poisonous to our environment than carbon exhaust.
And you know what? It's interesting that you don't see studies like that. You don't see the impact on the environment or on the people breathing this stuff in as to what death is actually doing. And government has a history of trying to solve one problem and creating another one or two at the same time. And that's certainly what they've done here. But yeah, death is a completely ridiculous solution.
This might be a good time to bring up what you spoke of, the FMCSA this morning.
Yeah.
So how it relates to this.
I was reading the news this week, and you wonder why transportation is screwed up. The FMCSA has appointed their third director this year. So Pickle Park Pete Buttigieg, who's the Secretary of Transportation, who knows nothing about transportation and nothing about trucking, has appointed the third FMCSA director this year, who also knows absolutely nothing about trucking, nothing about business, nothing about practical application. It's just another bureaucrat. They make the same money, so they don't really care. And it amazes me that the government wouldn't appoint somebody in the trucking industry, someone like Todd Spencer, who knows his way around these goofy policies and he understands trucking. Why not appoint a guy like that to head the FMCSA? And the answer is, well, he's not a bureaucrat. He's not an insider. Nobody knows who he is in Washington and likes him. Never mind about the practical side of that. We don't want anyone that isn't one of our political buddies, and that's crap. How's that support a nation? You know, it's all coming out of the taxpayer's pocket. And here we're going to have, another FMCSA head who God knows what he'll do, but he'll work to please Pickle Park Pete and get about as much accomplished as Pete's accomplished so far in his term, which is absolutely nothing. Nothing. He's accomplished nothing. And what good is that to us? What good is that to the economy? What good is that to the country? These politicians are supposed to be supporting the citizens. That's why we elect them. But it seems so many of them get in through, who they know and then do absolutely nothing except maybe cover their arses and get ready for the next appointment. It's the whole system is broken, frankly, and you can see why we're slowly starting to circle the drain. Is because nobody up at the top has a clue what's going on or what they're doing, and it's affecting all of us adversely.
Yeah, they need knowledgeable people.
Yes, they need.
That's why it's not one of the big reasons
They
it's
need
not working.
knowledgeable people in these positions, not some bureaucrat that just gets plunked in and goes, okay, today you're in charge of trucking. And he spends the first year trying to figure out what the front end from the back end of a truck is and knows nothing else, accomplishes nothing in the first year except trying to understand his portfolio. Sometimes he gets it, sometimes he doesn't, usually he doesn't, but he's more worried about playing golf than helping the trucking industry. So the whole thing's a disaster.
Comment, the last 3.5 years have been so hard for the industry. I went under due to the fact of inflation. In 2019, I made $246,000 last year, 85,000. I think the comment got cut off, but it's definitely declined.
And this party, this government, has been sliding since they got into office. They handled the pandemic completely wrong, and it put us billions and billions of dollars in debt. And you don't just come back from that overnight. And now they're struggling to play catch up most of the freight has disappeared. Most of the manufacturing has gone elsewhere. And even the shipping from other countries now, they don't even ship to Long Beach and LA anymore. They ship to Mexico, and it comes up through Mexico. So Mexico's making money on American goods, handling American goods, because we've screwed up our handling of the American goods. And it's an incredible mess. And someone needs to get in there and correct this whole thing. Someone that can see the big picture and say, you know what, this is all wrong. We need to fix this, this, and this, and not wait for 3 years to Congress to get around to voting on it.
Poet would like you to make sure that you include our Canadian government in that.
Poet, you don't even...
Don't get him started,
don't-
Poet,
Don't
please.
even get me started
Please. I don't allow him
But-
to.
on that. Happily, the majority of trucking is done in the States. So that if you fix everything in the States, I think we'll have a trickle effect up here.
Jack Thomas comments, the FMCSA needs to fix the hours of service. My idea is 12 hours driving, working, 12 hours off duty on 7 days within 84 hours per week. Loading and unloading stops the clock.
I agree that we've got huge issues there. And there's something that, they brought in this ELD that had its issues, but they needed to look at the issues and correct those problems. Like there's a complete lack of flexibility with the ELD hours, but they never did come back to it. They just kind of put it in place and went, well,
Deal with it.
deal with it. And that was a mistake because they didn't really care. And now, because the accident rate is up, in spite of the fact that these ELDs were supposed to fix that and didn't, now they've gone to automatic braking and stuff like that, speed limiters, and they seem to think they can fix the problems with technology. Technology is great, but it is not the end all and the be all and all the answers for all the problems. If they had responsible, professional drivers at the wheel and paid them properly, we wouldn't have any of these problems in the first place. Back in the 80s when I was trucking, we never saw the number of wrecks that we see today. And yeah, you can say, yeah, there's more traffic and more trucks on the road. That's true. But the majority of the wrecks that you see these days involving trucks involve stupid rookie mistakes by the drivers, the accidents that are the fault of the truck driver. Because we've got so many inexperienced and from out-of-country drivers that it has raised the accident rate, but nobody wants to talk about that. FMCSA doesn't want to talk about more skilled drivers and better training. They're against that. And that's crazy. Just insane policy. But yet that's what we've got these days.
And the public doesn't understand how trucking works.
But yeah, the public doesn't understand.
That doesn't help.
They're so busy just trying to survive in today's world that they don't have time to pay attention to the issues in our industry and what's going on. They just care if their Amazon parcel is late. And other than that, they're worried about the cost of groceries and gas. But they don't have time to look at the bigger picture. A lot of them don't understand the bigger picture. And they may start to pay attention now because the cost of the groceries is through the roof. And now Amazon is dealing with a strike for over 15,000 workers. Because while the guy that owns Amazon has made himself the richest guy in the world, he hasn't been paying all the people that work for him properly. So now they're starting to strike, and now they're starting to join the Teamsters and stuff like that. So suddenly the Amazon parcels are going to be a little late.
Will Daw comments, I love listening to you talk because it reminds me of Ricky from the Trailer Park Boys.
I've never seen the Trailer Park Boys. I'll have to watch that. But I know lots of guys love that show. I'm not a TV guy, but I'll have to check that out.
He's a YouTube guy, though.
I'll have to check that out.
He ain't no Ricky, dude.
No, I can.
That's what somebody said.
I can get on a roll and be ticked off about everything, and I can go for a while. But anyway, I guess that's it for my rant today. But my advice to government is pull in the heels on California here. Nail them down. Quit letting them dictate policy to the rest of the country because it's not working for us. California is already screwed up. Forget them. But don't let California screw up everybody else. But that's what's going on with CARB and the EPA these days. Take care. Thank you for listening to me.
Let's take a few comments here at the end.
All right.
Ryan says the ELD is an efficiency tool for the trucking companies, not for the driver. I don't care what people say. It forces drivers to drive tired.
That's exactly right. And that wasn't how they sold the thing. They sold the thing because trucking companies were working their drivers 18, 20 hours a day. So the purpose was to cut back on that. And all the carriers went, shit, we can't put up with that. How are we going to work that? So the carriers turned it into an efficiency tool. You're exactly right. And now the carrier forces the driver to get up at some ungodly hour because his 10 hours are up. And that's crazy. Forcing drivers out when they're tired, or when the weather's really bad, the roads are iced up, whether he's sick and he doesn't feel well. But that's how the ELD is used by these carriers. And the FMCSA has received thousands of complaints about this, and they've done nothing about it. There was a hotline that the FMCSA developed so drivers could phone into the FMCSA and say, hey, this is going on at this carrier. Investigate it, please, because it's killing us. We're driving tired. FMCSA has done zero. So it's just, it's such a poor, inefficient system.
Did you say the OOIDA was suing?
Well, the OOIDA works constantly fighting this type of stuff in Congress, but the FMCSA even appointed a driver's board, and it's headed by Todd Spencer. And it's a driver's panel, basically. But you never hear anything about what they're doing now, because I don't think they've been able to accomplish anything. Because the FMCSA goes, oh, that's nice, puts them in a back room, lets them air out their grievances, takes the list from them and goes, oh, well, thanks, Todd, appreciate the help. Scrunches it up and throws it in the garbage. You never see any positive results coming out of that, and I know that's not Todd Spencer's fault. So it's just politics, I guess.
The OOIDA, who are they suing?
The OOIDA was trying to sue California again over the...
Exactly, so you should bring that up.
Well, it wasn't a related issue, but they were trying to sue California over the AB5 legislation.
Oh,
but
okay, yeah.
Again, they lost.
Okay.
That's a separate issue
Yeah,
altogether.
it's another day.
But you've got to, if there's a way to defend yourself as a small-time truck driver, probably your best thing to do is to join the OOIDA. I belong to them, and they're the only group that actually fights for working truckers. And they have great resources. They've got people in Washington. That's probably the best thing you can do.
Got a comment, if they really want to fix the emissions problem, the government should give every trucker a free APU. How will electric trucks idle all night?
Well, and that's a good point too. They should mandate APUs for carriers that run in regions where they're needed. And that's hot or cold. They should mandate that, and they should put the cost of that onto the carrier. Like the company guys. Look at UPS. They had to strike to get the union to get them air conditioning in those little brown trucks that run around New York City in the summertime, just because they were passing it from heat exhaustion. Not just in New York, but everywhere UPS operated. They had to force the company to do it. And nobody else is going to force air conditioning on their drivers. They should be mandated that it's a comfortable working environment for truck drivers. You can't be slugging away in a truck when the temperature is 105 in Arizona. That just shouldn't be allowed. It defies what humans should expect for a working environment. Yes,
It's dangerous too.
It's dangerous. Guys pass out from heat exhaustion. They have strokes, and it should be mandated. Either APU or the truck has its own air conditioning and is allowed to idle if the driver needs it. And it's the driver's call. The company can't say, well, you're not too hot. It's the driver's call.
And they all have air conditioning.
Yeah, they all have air conditioning in their offices and their cars, and they won't do a 30-mile commute without turning on their air conditioning in the car, or their heat if they need it. But they expect truck drivers to live a little more substandard, and they pay them a little less. And you know, in my opinion, there is a working class, but there is no need for the working class to be more poorly treated than the upper middle class. We all have rights. We all have rights, and that's part of what the government is supposed to be enforcing. But the government loves cheap labor, and they love big industry that donates to their party. So it's an uneven system.
Okay, so a bit of a wrap up.
Yeah, so that's my rant on California. I think the federal government needs to curtail what California tries to get away with and is getting away with. I think probably a change in Washington will help that situation greatly. That's my prediction anyway.
Someone commented we are treated worse than the California homeless.
It's yeah.
Some days it's true.
Yeah, they don't force the California homeless to work, but they force the truck drivers to work
In the heat.
and don't pay them nearly enough for their time in most cases. Not nearly enough. So, and there's a perfect example of how well California operates its business. Look at the homeless situation in California. It's out of control, and they need new government in California as well, because that guy has destroyed the state and destroyed the economy.
Okay.
Anyway, take care. Thank you for listening to my rant. Have a safe drive out there, and we'll see you on the back haul.